Alright, welcome everybody to Total War Warhammer 2 Mortal Empires, the free expansion DLC to everybody who owns both Total War Warhammer 1 and 2. Combines the map and all the factions. So in this first episode, we will be taking it a little slow as I break down the gist of everything about this heavily complicated game. Starting first with the factions and the different legendary lords. I'm not going to go down every single legendary lord, but I will give a brief overview of each of the factions. Starting up, we have our High Elves. High Elves are a relatively well-balanced army. They have a lot of elite infantry and a lot of elite cavalry, and they have the access to dragons as their heavy support. The one big downside to them is they start strong but get weaker as the battle goes on, and they don't have a lot of artillery options, only having a giant bolt thrower, basically a ballista. You have the Lizard Men, who have access to very powerful frontline troops and incredibly powerful dinosaurs, as well as the Slann Mage Priests, the most powerful spellcasters in the entire Warhammer universe. The downside is they are not a terribly mobile army, and while they don't run away very easy, they can go berserk and lose control over your army. You have the Dark Elves, the Edgelord Supremes. They are a very strange army. Like the High Elves, they have very powerful infantry and cavalry, but they have more of a focus on skirmishing than the High Elves. A lot of really good hit-and-run tactics available to them. Big downside is they are relatively squishy. They also don't have a lot of good artillery options. And in the campaign mode, they are prone to rebelling. You have the Skaven, the never-ending swarm of steampunk rat people. Evil, malicious, and ever-hungry. They will constantly swarm the battlefield. Very rare is a day where you go into battle as a Skaven and you do not have the numerical advantage. There is a never-ending tide of these horrible little rat people. Big downside is they are mostly self-serving cowards and are quick to flee. So if you don't overwhelm your enemy, they will almost certainly outgrind you.
Empire's blessings, yes.
The Empire of Mankind. Essentially, Renaissance era Holy Roman Empire / Germany. They're kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. They have pretty good everything, but nothing they're the best at. Highly versatile, but if you come in with the wrong build, you will get stomped. The Dwarves. Very defensive, very reactionary. They have the best artillery pieces in the entire game, and almost every single one of them have crazy high defenses and armor. The downside is they have no cavalry options, and they are slow as dirt. You will be playing on the defense pretty much every time you play as the Dwarves.
King of Bretonia.
The Bretonnians, the foppish Frenchmen who live on the coast. They are your high fantasy chivalric knights. They have incredibly powerful cavalry. If you are good at micromanaging, this is the faction for you. They also have a lot of good air options, including Hippogriff Knights, which are some of the most terrifying things to see in the game. The downside is their infantry is pretty lackluster, their range options are mediocre, and if you lose your cavalry, you pretty much have lost the fight. The Greenskins, the Orcs and Goblins. They hit hard, they're rowdy, they are tough sons of bitches. The upside to them is they have a little bit of everything in their army, much like the Empire. You have plenty of options when you're playing as the Greenskins. The downside is they don't tend to stick around as much as the other factions. Orcs and Goblins are pretty quick to run away. The upside is they will rally and they will come back. So expect your forces to flee when you're playing as the Greenskins. The Vampire Counts. Undead forces, skeletons, zombies, horrible amalgamation monsters, ghouls, and all that. They are a rushdown force if there ever was one. All of their units cause fear or terror. They have a great deal of staying power, and their units will never ever run away. The downside is they have no ranged options. They are an entirely melee force. And instead of running away, their units simply fall apart. So if things start to go bad for the undead, they will go bad very fast. The Forces of Chaos. Heavily armored, highly powerful, horrible, demon-worshipping knights from the north. They are incredibly dangerous. Each and every one of them are elite troops into themselves. The downside is they will never have the numerical advantage. They are definitely quality over quantity. They also don't have a lot of ranged options, so they want to get stuck in a meat grinder. And then there's the Beastmen, the horrible goat people who worship the dark gods. Fast-moving, capable of vanguard deployment, they will get into a fight very quickly. Downside is they have very little in the way of armored options, and they don't tend to stick around much. They are definitely a blitz army. They get in there and they win fast or they lose fast. And then because I don't care about them, the Wood Elves, DLC faction that I have not purchased. Wood Elves are definitely a skirmishing force. They like hit-and-run tactics, they don't like to stick around in melee for very long, and they like to lead their enemies into traps that they have set. As I've mentioned, they don't have a really strong front line outside of their tree people and their beasts, which are weak to fire. The last faction, which is currently not in this build of the game, are the Norscan Raiders, the Vikings of the North. They have access to mammoths and werewolves and all sorts of other crazy beasties. They are another rushdown faction. They like to get in there quick and get stuck in. They don't have a lot of armor, so they need to close the line to not suffer too much from melee. The upside is a lot of their units have frost, which slows down enemy units, so if they break, they're not going to rally and come back. They're going to get run down by a bunch of werewolves. Because this channel is what it is, we will be playing as the Lizardmen under Lord Mazdamundi.
To you, Lord of the Solar City. Your domain is prosperous and powerful. Yet the same cannot be said for all realms of the younger generations. Many temples have fallen to ruin, or to invaders from afar. In the absence of a unified presence in Lustria, warm-blood trespassers have come. As the great plan ascribes, do not tolerate their presence. There are many cohorts of lizard men who will aid a slan of the second generation, although some have misinterpreted the great plan and may be hostile. The old ones shaped this world, and for too long have their designs been ignored. Their great plan must be fulfilled, Lord Mazdamundi, no matter the cost.
Alright, and here we are on the Grand Campaign map itself. For those of you not aware of the difference between a regular campaign and a Grand Campaign, in Total War Warhammer 1 and Total War Warhammer 2, there are separate maps. For Total War Warhammer 2, it's the Vortex map, which is this half of the world, plus this part down here. And for Total War Warhammer 1, it's more this half. The Grand Campaign map is very clearly compressed between the two. This isn't 100% geographically accurate. We probably won't see a full map of the world until Total Warhammer 3, where the thing beyond the World Edge Mountains here is revealed. But for now, this is the biggest map you can play in a campaign, and features every single race available in the game, even the one not currently playable in this build. One thing I forgot to mention in the previous screen, the difference between Legendary Lords. Each faction has multiple Legendary Lords to pick from, at least 2 per faction, and each one confers different bonuses and different downsides, depending on who you pick. For most races, you are able to eventually gain the other Legendary Lord in the campaign itself, but for the overall bonuses to your army, you do not get both their bonuses. You will only ever get one of their bonuses. So, to break down how this game works, the game is divided into 2 segments. You have your main overworld segment, which is what we're looking at now, and battle segments, which is the bread and butter of the game when 2 armies meet. You have 2 different kinds of characters. You have your generals. You can tell they're generals by their flag with a little bar next to it. That's the current strength of their army. And when you click on them, you can see the units in their army. Each unit has a different little portrait, and as you play, you start to learn the different portraits, so you can eyeball what exactly an army is made of just by a look. Enemy generals, depending on how close you are, there might be hidden units. You don't know what they are, but you do know they are there. The smaller characters that don't have the giant standard above them are hero units. Hero units can be embedded into an army, or they can be sent out to explore on their own. Each faction has multiple different types of heroes that can do different things. Some of them can attack other heroes, even incapacitate lords, and slow down armies. Others confer static bonuses to the region, either bonuses to you or penalties to your opponent, and you can use them to scout ahead, because armies cannot intercept heroes, but heroes can be detrimental to armies. For this particular hero, I'm going to go ahead and embed him, just so I have a melee beatstick in this magic user's army. You also have your settlements. Settlements are divided up into both cities and provinces. Whenever you click on one city, you bring up a screen that shows you every city in the province. It'll tell you what factions own them, and if you see this symbol, it is in ruins. Starting in Total War Warhammer 2, you introduce the Skaven, and the Skaven can dwell in ruins, so other factions can't see what they're doing. That's not that big of a deal in player versus computer, but in player versus player matches, that can be a bit of an advantage, even though you don't see a lot of player versus player in campaign mode, because that takes forever. To break down what you're looking at here, you have different slots for different buildings. Different buildings allow you to recruit different units or give you different overall buffs. Up here, you can see the amount of treasure a civilization has. Mine currently has 6,000 treasure, with 1,351 being generated per turn. Different units have different costs and upkeeps, and if you have too many units that your economy cannot support, you will start to lose money, and if you go bankrupt, bad stuff starts happening really quickly. So it's very important that you balance different buildings so that you're getting more money than you are spending. You have your core building. It's either for the city or for the settlement. Each province has one capital city that has 8, 10 slots for buildings. Settlements only have 4. Additionally, these have different tiers that go up to 5 for the main cities and 4 for the individual little settlements. The types of buildings you can build is based on what tier your main building is at. Every single settlement will have your military buildings. These allow you to recruit different units. Your technology buildings that will give you access to different units and technologies. Your defensive buildings, which bolster the fortifications of that particular settlement. And your economy buildings that will bolster your economy or your public order. If you look here to explain these different little numbers here, next to the gold coin is your wealth and income. It's how much money this particular settlement is generating. There's your public order. That's how well your citizens are happy. If that goes down to negative 100, they will rebel and an army will spawn that is hostile towards you. Next to that is corruption. There are 3 types of corruption in the game: Skaven, Vampire, and Chaos. If you're not playing Skaven, Undead, or Chaos, this is a bad thing. They are always a detriment to your public order, so you want to keep that as close to 0 as you can. Starting in Total Warhammer 2, it also measures how untainted the area is. And lastly, there's your garrison size. It's how many units are currently stationed here. You cannot manually increase or decrease this number. It is always set at that. Building defensive fortifications and upgrading your main building will increase that garrison number. Additionally, certain settlements will have access to special resources. These generally will increase the amount of money that generates. And landmarks. Only specific cities will have landmarks, and those landmarks are specific to that city. Keep in mind, landmarks are not locked to different races, so if you capture an enemy settlement that can build landmarks, you can still build their landmark and gain that bonus. The yellow lines here, whenever you click on an army or a character, is how far they can move in that turn. You can click and drag to form a specific route, or you can simply click on a special spot to have them go directly to that. The red circles around different armies is their radius of action. Essentially, if you move into this radius, you have to fight them. So if you don't want to fight them, you have to go around. If you have 2 allied armies that are within their own circles, the other army will support the first if they go into a fight. So you can gang up on enemy units that are too powerful. That is the gist of the overworld, so let's get into a battle. Whenever you go to fight an army, that army has the option of running away. However, armies can only retreat once a turn. Retreats come either when they lose a battle or when they decide not to fight a battle in the first place. Once we get into this map, we get the balance of power. That's how strong one army is compared to the other one. My army is overwhelmingly more powerful than this army, so I could very easily hit the auto-resolve and win without too much trouble. When you auto-resolve, you will take some damage to your units based on the balance of power. With this, it wouldn't be too much. And when you're dealing with a lot of smaller battles, it's wise to just do that just to save yourself some time. Do not take this as gospel truth, as there have been many a times where smart leadership and clever tactics can win a battle like this in their favor. Of course, this is AI controlled on normal difficulty, so they will not. There's also the retreat option. Again, you can only retreat once a turn. If you get caught by an army after you've retreated, your army will be entirely lost if you lose that battle. We are going to fight this battle just to show you what that looks like. So here we are on the battlefield. First thing you'll notice is this option to gamble or start deployment. You will only ever see this option if you have spellcasters on the field. This is your Winds of Magic. The number here is how much power you have to start with, and this bar on the side is how much power you will generate over the course of the battle. Magic spells, especially in Total War Warhammer 2, are incredibly powerful and can very easily change the tide of battle in your favor or against you, depending on how they are used and when they are deployed. Having more is always better, but gambling is, like it says, a gamble. Sometimes you'll get more often than not, you will lose that and you won't get as much. So only do that if you're in a desperate situation. This is the deployment phase of a battle. As you can see, the battlefield is set. The red is where the other army can deploy, the yellow is where your army can deploy. You cannot deploy further out. If I had any units that had what's called Vanguard deployment, there would be a white line that is how far I can deploy my Vanguard units. I currently have no Vanguard units, so I don't get that. Generally speaking, units in this game can be divided into several categories. You have your infantry units, they're frontline fighters. You have your ranged units, they are missile troops, they will shoot but aren't very good in close combat. You have your monsters, which basically work almost like living siege engines. Some factions, like the dwarves and the humans, also have actual siege engines. You have your monstrous infantry, they work just like regular infantry, only they are bigger and stronger. You have your lords and heroes, as are these two fine gentlemen in the back here. And you also have cavalry, which are your mounted units, which this army presently does not have any of. And you have your artillery, which are long-ranged, heavy damage units, which I do not have any of in this inventory. And to be frank, lizardmen do not have, lizardmen do not have very good artillery options. When deploying your units, it's very important that you think about the terrain. Charging downhill infers a bonus, so setting up on top of a hill is very advantageous, especially since charging up a hill is more difficult and will exhaust a unit, making them less effective in combat. Hiding in forests is also a wise idea. As you see down here in this bar, sometimes you get this little eyeball. That means the unit is hidden and is invisible to the enemy forces. It's important that you put only ground troops, as cavalry does not perform very well in forests, unless you are the Beastmen, which is one of their special traits. Generally speaking, when you're deploying your troops, you want to put your ranged contingent up front with your frontline infantry behind them, with the idea of, as you go into battle, your ranged units will fire on the enemies first, and then when it looks like they're about to be engaged in melee, you pull your ranged units back and send your frontline forward. I'm going to treat my monsters as my cavalry for this fight and set them up on the flanks. Spellcasters typically are very terrible in melee, so you do not want to put them up front. The exception to this rule is, of course, the vampires, as they are monsters in any form. So, selecting units is just a matter of clicking them. You can also click their portraits down here. You can also group units together by hitting Ctrl-G. Once they are grouped, they will move in formation. So if you have them set up in a way you want, you don't have to individually re-click and drag them around. So we're going to go ahead and start this battle. This game does work in real time, so every second matters and every decision counts. Important things to note. Each unit, as you can see here, is eager, flank secure, and fresh. The eager and flank secure is regarding their leadership. That's how secure they are in battle and whether or not they believe they're going to win. If a unit begins to think they will lose, this white bar will go down, and when that hits 0, they will run away. The exceptions to that are lizardmen, who have a chance of going berserk instead, and they will keep fighting, but you will lose any control over them, and the undead, who will simply start to fall apart as the dark magic that holds them together begins to fail. You have their HP, which if you played any video game ever, you know exactly what that is. It's how much damage they can take before they die. And for ranged units, you have a third bar, which is their current ammunition. Now, what the fresh part means, it doesn't mean they are funky fresh. It means they are fresh, well-rested, and ready for battle. As a battle progresses, they will lose that, and eventually become exhausted. The closer to exhausted a unit gets, the worse they will do in battle. Which is one of the reasons why you don't want to run uphill, as that will exhaust you very quickly. Now, as you can see, certain units have these giant beams of light shooting up out of them. That means they are special hero or general characters. It's so that you can spot them at a distance. If a hero goes down, boo-hoo, it's terrible. You've lost a very powerful unit, but it's not the end of the world. If an army's general goes down, the entire army suffers a major leadership penalty, so they're more likely to run away. Now, as you can see, my army is marching rather solemnly up towards the battlefield in no great hurry. This is just to conserve their endurance. If they were to run all the way, they would get there tired, as these guys have set up on hills like a bunch of freaking cowards. The only time you really want to run is if you're being hammered by artillery, and then the opponent has basically given you a ticking timer. Attacking units is just a matter of point and click. I've ordered these guys to get range on these, just to lure them down off this hill, because I don't want to charge uphill. They have shields, so this isn't the best of options, so they're just going to be there. If you hold down shift when you're making your orders, you can order them to go in a special way, so they can come into the flanks. Okay, these guys have now gotten fed up with being pelted with javelins, so they are coming downhill, and my warriors are going up to meet them. Once you get within a certain range, your units will automatically start running so they can get a charge. Some units get a bonus when they are charging. That's called their charge bonus. This is very important to things like cavalry units. Once a battle like this has started, it's always a good idea to try to flank your enemies. As you can see, this unit is already ready to run away because they have been flanked. The idea for a lot of your units is to get them head-to-head and hold them down, while other units, like my monsters here, come around from the flanks and envelop them. This is called hammer and anvil. Alright, I'm going to send my hero to go deal with this guy. And Lord Mazdamundi has magical spells at his disposal. So, as you can see, these guys are already fleeing, and they have basically broken off from the battle. Once a unit is fleeing, unless you need your unit to be doing something else, it's wise to send your units to chase after them, because they are less likely to rally and come back if they are being pursued. Additionally, fleeing units will never, ever fight back, so you basically get to score as many free kills as you like. Norscan Raiders are not exactly the best frontline forces, especially when compared to my elite Temple Guards and Croxagors. However, now they have their mounted skirmishers left, and they are a pain in the butt to deal with. And Lord Mazdamundi currently has no offensive spells. So, even if you're not physically seeing your army, you can get an idea of what each of your units is doing by this little bar down at the bottom. Little arrows mean they're moving. 1 arrow is fast, 2 arrows is running. Little bow and arrow means they're taking fire from ranged. 2 swords crossed with each other means they are currently fighting something in melee. Different colors depend on how well they're doing. Green being good, red being bad. And if you click on a unit and hold down spacebar, you can see what your odds of beating a unit are. Green being very good, red being don't try it unless you want to lose this unit. Oh no! Oh no! Maybe fighting dinosaurs without a shirt on is a bad idea. Maybe this was a very bad idea. So, all that's left are their mounted skirmishers, who are always a pain in the butt because they are fast moving and can fire while moving. This makes them very hard to nail down. This white line here is the edge of the battlefield. If a unit breaks and runs away, once they cross that line, they are no longer involved in the battle. So once every enemy unit has crossed this line, the battle is over. Last thing to mention is this up here, the balance of power. Once this hits all the way to the other one side or the other, the battle is considered lost, and any forces left suffer major leadership penalties and will eventually break and run away. As for things running away, they can be either routed or shattered. Routed units can rally and return to the battlefield if they decide maybe they can actually win this fight. However, if all hope is lost, they are shattered and they are not coming back to the battle. They are gone for good. this unit is shattered. No matter what happens, they are not going to recover, and they're going to keep on running away. Now that the battle is over, I can end the battle at my will, though oftentimes in a campaign battle, it's a good idea to keep around and try to mop up any remaining units, as damage and casualties will be persistent. But since this army has already run away once this battle is over, everything is done, and the entire faction will be lost. This is also your results screen. You can see how well the units did, how many kills any given unit scored, your deployment, their deployment, what you lost, and what remains. This is a good way if you're just picking up the game and you're still learning to get an idea on how effective your tactics are. As you can see, my Temple Guards had 50 kills and my Source Warriors had 75, so they were very effective in this. My hero scored 0 kills. This isn't always a clear indication of how well a unit fared, because this hero was busy beating the crap out of their general, who, as you can see, didn't die, but he only scored 1 kill, so I think my unit was very successful. Be more successful if you flat out killed the guy, but you can't have everything. But as I said, since this army already retreated once this turn, they are completely destroyed, and they will leave the field. Completely destroying an army is very good if you're doing the destroying, but you really do not want to lose an army, as armies take turns and huge amounts of resources to recover. So as long as your units have even one person left in a squad, they can recover without terrible cost. So when given the option, if you can retreat and survive, it's always advisable to do so. After a fight, you gain some loot, which will add to your economy. Sometimes you will pick up magic items that you can equip to your heroes. Your general and any hero will gain experience, which they can use on their screen. I'll show you in just a second. Once the battle is done, you will always be given 3 options. You have the get more money option. In this case, it's release captives. The different factions have different names for these that are more fitting to the various factions. Doing this will get you a bunch of money, but it will slow down how quickly your damaged units heal. You can kill the units for some kind of gain. Some factions give you experience, others give you morale. It varies from faction to faction. And the last one is recover your own units. For a lot of factions, it's seen as forced conscription. For Lizardmen, it's you eat your captives. We're going to eat them so I can recover this army faster. As you can see, because he ran for the second time that turn, he just straight up died. Anyone who isn't a legendary lord has the chance of dying forever. So if you build up one of your generals and they get killed in battle, that's it. They're gone. Too bad. Legendary lords will always only be wounded and be removed from the board for a couple of turns, but they will be back. This means you can also kill enemy lords that are getting too powerful and too prevalent, as long as they are not legendary lords. Now let's show the other different little buttons we have down here. You have your rights. This is new for Total War Warhammer 2. Certain factions have access to rights. They are basically temporary buffs you can give yourself depending on the situation. Excuse me. You need to do certain things in order to unlock these rights, but once you do, they will simply have a cost that you pay. They also have how long they last and how many turns between you can doing them. Let me try that sentence again, because that was a complete failure of English. There is how long the effect lasts and how long until you can use it again. Different ones do different things, and each army has their own. You also have your tech tree. Certain factions have technologies available to them from the start, others you need to build certain buildings first to unlock them. As the game goes on, these tech trees, as you would imagine if you've ever played an RTS before, give you faction-wide buffs to different things. Some of them favor your economy, others favor specific kinds of units. The more advanced the technology is, the longer it takes to research, so bear that in mind. You then have your diplomacy. Any faction you have met, you can instigate diplomacy with. Certain races have better relations with other races. High Elves tend to get along with everyone who isn't blatantly evil. Lizardmen tend to get along with anyone who isn't trying to take all of their stuff or blow up the world. Others, like Chaos factions, tend to want to just murder everybody. Whenever you click on a faction, you get their current rank in the world, any traits they have, and their relationship to other factions. You will only ever see relationships to factions you have discovered. So I have no idea what's going on over in the old world, because I'm over here in Lustria, and just do not care what's going on the other side of the ocean. With factions, you can open trade with them to get more money, you can declare war on them to go kick their teeth in, you can try to press for peace so that you guys stop murdering each other, or you can form alliances. You can form an alliance with any faction who, whether or not they are of your own species, but if they are of your own species, you can also try to press for confederation, which basically means you will absorb them into their faction as well as anything they currently have, standing armies included. Your objectives for the world, you have your victory conditions and your chapter conditions. Between each chapter, you get a little reward. In Total Warhammer 2, there's also the Vortex map, which is trying to gain control over this lovely swirling vortex of magical power over here. You can do rights to affect it, and there's a meter up there to show you what you are doing. But since only the new factions have any interaction with it, in the Grand Campaign that is apparently turned off. Each faction has their own overworld bonuses. In the case of Lizardmen, is the Geomantic Web. Essentially, it is a web connecting the capitals of every single province. The more of them you control, the more they boost the signal around you, and you can build items in your capital to boost that. Essentially, whenever you control an entire province, you get to issue decrees, which give a province-wide buff to economy, growth, military, etc., etc. For the Lizardmen, you can further amplify the effects of that with the Geomantic Web. This encourages you to expand outward and to take over different little settlements. Okay, now we have our Lord level up screen. Whenever a Lord gains a level, you can purchase one thing on this as long as you have the prerequisites. Some prerequisites are levels, others are simply doing things previously on the screen. In Total Warhammer 2, the max level is 40, so you can never buy everything on the screen, but you will have access to a lot of it. Every single general in the game has at least 3 skill trees. That is their individual skill tree, their army skill tree, and their overworld skill tree. Each of these give different little effects. No matter what kind of build you're going for, I always recommend picking up Route Marcher, I'm sorry. That gives you a plus 10 to your movement range on the overworld map. Not having that can be a really detrimental, because almost every single army picks it up, and armies that have it will always outrun armies that do not. And lastly, for heroes and lords, you have their individual screen where you can give them different armors and followers. This is like any equipment screen in an RPG. You can equip different things and infer different buffs. The game has just started, so I have very little to give Lord Mazdamundi here. You also have followers and banners. These give you army-wide buffs. Banners you can assign to units at the start of a battle, and it will give them a unit-wide buff. Only generals can carry banners in. Heroes cannot carry banners. They can equip everything else, though. Last thing to mention, even though they have mounts listed here, you unlock mounts by leveling up. You can never find mounts. The only reason you have this option here is so you can dismount a character after they've earned a mount. The big reason why you want to do this is in siege battles, because you cannot climb walls while on a horse. This is not Skyrim. Last thing to mention with armies on the overworld map here is their different stances. This little meter here is their current movement range. It is how far they can move in a turn. Each army has the option of going into ambush stance, which if an enemy army moves within their range, they will have the chance of ambushing them, which puts them in a highly advantageous battle. Some factions like this more than others. Beastmen and Skaven love ambushes. Other factions, like the Chaos Warriors, are not as good as it. There's the March stance, which allows you to move even further, at the downside of if you get into a fight while in this stance, your entire army starts exhausted. Not a great thing. There's Encampment, which gives you a defense bonus at the cost of not being able to move for the rest of the turn. You will no longer take attrition, which is if your army is in a hostile environment, you will lose members of that army over time, and you can recruit new units while outside of your own territory. If you have a spellcaster in your army, you can channel, which gives you more winds of magic at the cost of some of your movement range. And then every other faction has different little things. The Lizardmen, being star people, have astronomy, which gives them a defense against ambushing. Some of their units get vanguard deployment, and they get further line of sight at the cost of 25% of their movement range. Any army that lives underground has the ability to travel through the underways, which is basically a teleportation that ignores any kind of terrain penalties from any movement penalties from terrain, so they could pass through mountains or cross rivers without problem. The downside is it's one and done. You cannot move again after you've used this ability, and you cannot use it if you've moved at all. A lot of other races, I think every other race aside from Lizardmen, also have the raiding stance, which gives them resources and plunder at the cost of diplomacy with other factions that they do this with. Alright, that is the gist of it, and we will continue on.